I've recently been exploring ancient ruins, solving puzzles, and dodging a few traps. Virtually, of course. Tomb Explorer VR gives you that classic treasure hunter experience, but let's not get carried away just yet. While the idea of exploring long lost tombs sounds like a VR dream come true for some, this game may not live up to the adventure it promises. Now, there are moments where you will feel like an intrepid adventurer for sure, discovering forgotten treasures and solving dangerous puzzles, but Tomb Explorer VR has its fair share of bumps along the road. Whether it's visuals or gameplay mechanics, there are areas that might not shine as brightly as you'd hope. Still, for fans of adventure games, there's enough here to warrant a closer look. I went on an adventure to see if this game truly delivers on that treasure hunting VR experience, or if it's just another artifact best left behind. So let's delve deeper, starting with the graphics. Tomb Explorer VR was designed with older headsets in mind, which might explain why the graphics feel a bit dated. Running the game on high settings, I expected my Quest 3 to handle it with ease, but even then, the visuals didn't quite meet modern VR standards. While the game defaults to medium settings, I bumped it up to high, and while it can be relatively smooth, the graphical experience wasn't as sharp or polished as I'd hoped. The environments do their job setting the stage for exploration, but they're not exactly showstoppers. The textures are basic, and some areas like your own hands and surroundings look a bit rough around the edges. Throw in outdoor environments that are a little too bright to feel natural, and it does take away a little from the immersive feel of being a treasure hunter. One area the game does stand out visually is with the gear you use. The tools and equipment have noticeably more detail compared to the environment. It's nice to have something worth looking at even if the extra detail isn't as polished as you'd hope. On the upside, the game runs smoothly, even on high settings with no major performance issues. So while the graphics might not be groundbreaking, at least the experience remains fluid and accessible. Overall, the visuals serve their purpose, but don't expect anything that will blow you away. The upside here is that we have a consistent theme with this game. Tomb Explorer is an exploration puzzle solving game. Think of classic dungeon delving games, but with a focus shifted more towards brain teasers and treasure hunting rather than combat. The game leans heavily into the concept of exploring ancient structures, and while it may not always feel groundbreaking, it does deliver a good adventure experience for fans of this genre. Each map is themed around a specific culture, such as the Mayans or Aztecs, which adds some variety to your exploration. The environments do a good job capturing the essence of these civilizations too, even if the visuals aren't top tier. Then you have the puzzles that are well integrated into these environments, so as you make your way through crumbling ruins and eerie temples, you'll be solving challenges that range from basic to moderately complex. What keeps this game interesting is the sense of progression though. According to this game's roadmap, there are plans for player skills, tool upgrades, and weapon upgrades, but we'll get into that in a bit. As you explore, you'll collect treasures, many of which are optional but add that feeling of discovery for you completionists out there. It's surprisingly satisfying to stumble across hidden relics or artifacts as you make your way through each map. Now, that said, the game doesn't always create a sense of danger or urgency, which can make exploration feel a little slow at times. Speaking of slow at times, the mechanics are a bit of a mixed bag. It's clear this game is still in early access, and while the core systems are there, they could definitely use some polish. Some features show a lot of promise, but others, especially when it comes to movement and interaction, can be frustrating at times. For example, during the tutorial, I encountered issues with the whip that allows you to swing across gaps. The thing is, instead of swinging in an arc like you'd expect, it dragged me straight across, making simple movement feel clunky and unintuitive. And that's just one instance where the movement mechanics fell short. This game's physics-based movement system can feel awkward, especially when it comes to jumping puzzles, where imprecise controls make things more frustrating than fun. I focused my gameplay on the 3 Petra maps as they seem to be the first ones players will encounter. Logically, you'd expect the earliest levels to be the most polished, but even here the mechanics left something to be desired. The game does have different difficulty settings though, which is a nice touch, but they didn't seem to work properly for me at least on the last Petra map, which may be a bug that needs addressing. This added to the sense that the mechanics, while functional, aren't quite there yet. One thing to note though is that, again, the developers plan to introduce player skills and weapon upgrades amongst other things in future updates. This could definitely improve the overall gameplay experience. However, the devs don't really explain how these additional changes will fit into the current mechanics or how they'll enhance exploration or combat. And I only bring that up because I'm having a hard time picturing how these systems will tie in after playing the game myself. Speaking of combat, there are supposed to be boss fights, but after spending a couple of hours in the game, I hadn't encountered any. Given how basic the combat feels so far though, maybe that's not such a bad thing, especially with combat not being a focus here. What is a focus is the whole Explorer vibe, and when it comes to audio, Tomb Explorer VR isn't bad, all things considered.
Tight squeeze ahead. Let's hope this passage doesn't decide to give me a hug I won't forget.
This game includes voice acting, which, while not outstanding, adds more to the experience than it detracts. Without it, the game might feel a little too quiet with no sense of real depth, so the inclusion of voice work definitely helps build some atmosphere. The performances don't quite hit the emotional highs you might expect from a treasure hunting adventure though.
Well, if it isn't my dear sister Athena, gracing us with her presence at the beach. What have you been up to?
The dialogue itself can feel a little rigid. It's spoken like something out of a book rather than a natural conversation between people, which can make the exchanges feel a bit off. Still, the voice acting is certainly better than having no dialogue at all, and believe it or not, it does add to the immersion in its own way. As for the sound effects, generally they do a good job at enhancing this game's atmosphere, but I did run into a persistent bug, literally. After killing these annoying flying bugs, the sound of their attacks sometimes persisted, making me feel like I was still under attack even after I dealt with them. It wasn't a major issue, but it did break the immersion a few times. Hopefully that's something the developers will address sooner rather than later, but something that doesn't really need immediate addressing, in my opinion, is the options. Now, I do think this game could benefit from a vignette option with all the climbing and swinging, but it's not absolutely terrible without it. One feature I did appreciate was the arachnophobia mode. While it's nice to see the developers are including accessibility options though, the execution felt a bit awkward. Instead of replacing the spiders with a different enemy, model, or creature, the arachnophobia mode simply removes them, which is weird since the spiders are one of the main common enemies in the Petra maps. It makes the experience feel a bit empty when you're supposed to be facing a threat, but instead you encounter nothing. Otherwise, the game has a height calibration feature that technically works, but I found myself stuck at chest level standing next to my, sister. At first, I thought it was because I'm not very tall, but after doing some research, I found that other players have had similar issues. It's a minor but noticeable quirk that could use some fine-tuning. And that brings us to the immersion. As with all my reviews on early access games, I don't score the individual categories because they technically aren't complete. That said, immersion is the key factor in any VR game, and Tomb Explorer VR has moments where it pulls you in, but as we've discussed, it's not without its hurdles. The game's premise, exploring ancient ruins, solving puzzles, and uncovering treasures, should make for an engaging, immersive experience, and to an extent it does. You'll find yourself feeling like an explorer at times, especially when you discover well-hidden relics deep within temples. Where I hesitate is that, in its current state, Tomb Explorer VR offers moments of immersion for sure, but they're often interrupted by the game's technical and design shortcomings. There's definitely potential here, and for fans of exploration and puzzle-solving games, if you like trying new things, this one might be worth a try, but not at its current price point, in my opinion. If you're looking for a game that's without a doubt worth your money, check out some of my other reviews, and until next time, stay immersed.